Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Quiquira Wash Process Peru from Friedhats Coffee. And there's the bottle right there. And I'll go ahead and take you around the bottle again, as Friedhats has my favorite packaging in the entire world. The Friedhats, based out of Amsterdam, Netherlands, and they're a coffee roaster that has appeared on the channel several times before, including recently when we reviewed one of their wash process Colombian coffees. And the original plan was to actually release this review first, followed up by that Colombian, as I expected to like that Colombian coffee a lot more than this coffee. However, I found this to be the more interesting review, so I saved this one for last, as this right here is day 25 of this coffee. The recipe we went with for this coffee was the same, a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 95 degrees Celsius, 203 degrees Fahrenheit, which once again is a little cooler than I typically brew for something this light. However, it's the recipe I kept finding. It worked well for me, as did higher temperatures, so I don't think you can necessarily go wrong with this coffee. And that's the same for the brew method, as I like this one through both the V60 as well as the Chemex, so either of those work too. Friedhats is a European light for the roast profile. With those things out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 7, first impression, and it is funny, I was drinking these coffees side by side, this Peru and that Colombian, and I noticed the exact same thing, which was, once again, a kind of darker aspect to these coffees, this kind of dark honey molasses that I described so much in that Colombian review. It was very much present in this coffee, and it's been present in pretty much every Friedhats coffee that I've ever had. So I just kind of noticed it was likely too early to be drinking this coffee, as it just basically had that very light chocolate base, which is what you oftentimes get from a coffee that's not quite well rested yet. So nothing too pointed in a specific direction. The only flavor note they have listed on here is this kind of unique grape descriptor. And it would have been a little bit of a stretch for me to say I was experiencing anything, but it was a kind of slight fruit in general. So there was something there. And the notes remained the same on day 9, as once again, I wasn't necessarily able to get anything too specific. Slight bit of that, once again, darker Friedhats-like honey component to this cup of coffee, and an ever so slight soft fruit very much in the background. Nothing too pointed, nothing too distinct. We continue on as day 11, a little bit more of the softer fruit in this cup in general, but starting to see just kind of general improvement to the cup of coffee as a whole, a little bit more structure, a little bit more focus. But that once again goes to the lesson that I always say, rest is extremely important for coffees, and I like to do this to just kind of demonstrate that in so many of these videos. And also, I'm not going to lie, because sometimes I really need to start a coffee, so that's exactly what happened here. And on day 13, I was finally starting to see a little bit more from this coffee, as this was the greatest improvement I'd experienced to this point. Increased sweetness overall, almost reminiscent of some dark candied fruits. A bit of that classic dark honey yet again, so just seeing some darkness in this cup of coffee, but general improvement. So we continue, as on day 15, I have seen significant improvements to this point, as it's much sweeter. So this cup of coffee, which came out as a very kind of tame, toned down coffee on these earlier days, has really started to see a lot of sweetness to it, as there is a fair bit of South American characteristics to it as well, including that, well, pretty floral chocolate bar that I described from so many light profiled coffees in general, as well as that noted dark honey. That's going to be consistent throughout, and it's persistent in almost all of these Friedhats coffees I experience, as there's also a slight bit of this herbality to complement a bit of berry. I'm finally starting to get a lot of that fruit that they had listed. Day 17, a slightly more robust through the V60, but I was continuing to see incremental improvement. So as a result, a little bit more just robust flavors coming from this cup of coffee, including an increased amount of sweetness. Sweetness is continuing to go up, which is a wonderful thing, especially for a wash processed coffee. Ever so slight nuttiness and an almost grape juice-like aspect to this cup of coffee. And it's on day 19, I finally nailed down a flavor note that I'm quite happy with, as it has remained consistent. However, we've continued to see increases in just the overall sweetness of this cup of coffee, as well as the structure, as it is quite reminiscent, and this is what it reminded me of, those light-colored Lifesaver gummies. That's exactly what this coffee reminded me of, and I went out and purchased a bag of those gummies and tried them, and I'm like, yeah, this is what this coffee is. And the flavor note they have listed on here, I think, is something like chilled grape under the skies or something like that, which is kind of cute. But if I had to describe it, if I was the one coming up with these notes, I would say a white Lifesaver gummy, and I think that's like a white grape flavor note, funny enough. So complemented with plenty of that dark molasses honey like Friedhats component that I experienced. I tried it again on day 22. I didn't write down any notes, but between day 22 and day 25, I've seen the same consistency, a slight bit of an increased sweetness to this cup of coffee, and as a result, just better structure, better enjoyment, better focus, and as a result, better clarity in general. So it's just continuing to get better. right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And 3 level 4s, let's run through those real quick. The cleanliness, I actually think this is the cleaner of the 2 coffees. So as a result, that 4 is definitely justified. Yeah, 4 is perfect for it. The sweetness at a level 4, this has that great sweetness that I really love from coffee in general. When you hit this mark, this is like the perfect 4, where it's not on the lower side of the 4 and it's by no means overbearing. It's just great, especially for a wash processed coffee. So I love that 4 mark for this coffee. Berry fruit, level 4, yeah, by far the most pronounced characteristic, especially by the end, and it is a wonderful, as they list on here, grape. That definitely goes in the berry category, and it's definitely present in this cup of coffee, and I think it's a spot-on descriptor for it. Florality, that's pretty consistent with Friedhats coffees. For the most part, they always seem to score in that level 3 mark, as this has a little bit of some more subtle florals to it, a little bit of an herbal floral to it as well, so I think that's justified. The acidity, I think, is only toned down at the level 3 because, once again, it's being brewed at more moderate temperatures in general. And when I did brew this coffee at higher temperatures, I mean, of course, I tried it at those higher temperatures. It definitely came out a little bit more acidic, but, you know, keeping this coffee a little bit more toned down in general, I kind of wonder where this coffee might have finished with the sweetness. So, kind of interesting there. Finish level 3 doesn't have the most lasting finish, which has been kind of a theme with Friedhats coffees too, is they're not the most lasting coffees in general. But it's such a clean and even finish that I don't mind it being a little lower, given that the finish is quite enjoyable in general. Everything else scores at least at a level 2, and I don't think that there's anything else too much worth discussing on this tasting wheel, as I think this is a really nice representation of what I was experiencing from this coffee. And once again, it's kind of in line with most Friedhats tasting wheels, as nothing scores really, really high, and you almost get a bit of everything in the entire tasting wheel. Alright, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This one actually surprised me. This one was a lot better than I was expecting, especially based off the first couple of cups of coffee. And by the end, it's probably my favorite Friedhats coffee that I've ever had. That sweetness was such a wonderful factor to it. It has a lot of the attributes I really love. A little bit of a nice flavor profile to it. Great sweetness, great clarity, and a little bit more toned down on the acidity. So for all of those factors, I think it just places really well. And Peru in general for me this year has been one of the few origins that I thought has been having an up year. Pretty much every Peru that I've reviewed to this point has been quite nice. This is another great example of that. They really did a good job with this cup of coffee. I don't really have too much more to add to that. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, and I hate going back to this because it is a Friedhats coffee, but they all seem to have that same base, that kind of darker base in general. However, given that this one had a more distinct profile to it, that seemed to really help this coffee. Has great sweetness, has great clarity, and is lighter profile in general. So I think all of those factors would make it a really good drink for a lot of people. I think if you really like those gummy bears, I found this to be a really nice fit for May, and that's why I think it outperformed my expectations anyway. I think for the most part, though, I'll leave this review at that. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, or once again, anything from Friedhats, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it, or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Quiquira Wash Process Peru from Friedhats Coffee. Thank you for watching.